Picture this. You're scrolling through your feed on a lazy Sunday morning, coffee in hand, just looking for something interesting. Then suddenly, you're furious. Your heart is racing, your jaw is clenched, and you're typing an angry response to someone you've never met about an issue you'd never heard of 5 minutes ago. Sound familiar? But notice something strange about that transformation. You didn't plan it. One moment you were peacefully browsing, the next you were emotionally hijacked by forces you couldn't see or resist. Something invisible reached through that screen and rewired your consciousness in real time. 4 thinkers, writing long before smartphones existed, understood exactly what would happen to us. They mapped the psychological territories we now navigate daily. The crowd mind, the surveillance state, the prison of thoughtless participation. More importantly, they left us breadcrumbs leading toward freedom. What we're exploring goes far beyond digital detox or screen time limits. This is about consciousness itself. How it gets captured, how it gets controlled, and how ancient philosophical insights can help us reclaim authentic awareness in an age designed to steal it from us. Let's start our journey in 1895, long before anyone dreamed of smartphones or social networks. A French social psychologist named Gustave Le Bon published a book called The Crowd, a Study of the Popular Mind. In it, he described something that would have seemed like science fiction to his contemporaries: how individual human beings could lose their personal identity and reasoning ability when they became part of a group. Le Bon observed that crowds don't think. They feel. They don't reason. They react. And most importantly, they transform ordinary rational people into something entirely different. As he put it, the most striking peculiarity presented by a psychological crowd is the following. Whoever be the individuals that compose it, however like or unlike be their mode of life, their occupations, their character, or their intelligence, the fact that they have been transformed into a crowd puts them in possession of a sort of collective mind. Now, here's where it gets eerie. Le Bon identified 3 key characteristics of crowd psychology that will sound disturbingly familiar to anyone who spent time online. First, anonymity. When people feel anonymous, they lose their sense of individual responsibility. Online, even when we use our real names, we're essentially anonymous, separated from real consequences by screens and distance. That comment you fire off, that share of outrage content, you're not really you. You're part of something larger and more diffuse. Second, contagion. Emotions spread through crowds like wildfire, and rational thought gets swept away. Think about how quickly a Twitter storm builds. One person shares something inflammatory, others amplify it, and within hours, millions of people are feeling the same intense emotion about the same thing. You didn't choose to feel angry. You caught anger like a virus. Third, suggestibility. Crowds are incredibly susceptible to simple, emotionally charged messages. Complex nuance disappears, replaced by black and white thinking. Online, this manifests as the reduction of complex issues into shareable sound bites, memes that oversimplify reality, and the tendency for every discussion to devolve into tribal warfare. But there's a fourth element Le Bon didn't fully explore that digital platforms have weaponized: conformity, pressure. Research shows that when faced with a group consensus, roughly 3/4 of people will abandon their own judgment to avoid standing out. So, you're scrolling through comments on a controversial post. The top responses all share the same viewpoint, reinforced by hundreds of likes. Even if you initially disagreed, that wall of consensus creates psychological pressure to either stay silent or gradually shift your position. Digital platforms amplify this through trending indicators, popularity metrics, and algorithmic promotion of majority viewpoints. They literally show you what the crowd thinks before you've had a chance to form your own opinion. That little number showing 2.3 million people are talking about this isn't just information. It's social pressure disguised as data. Le Bon wrote, "A crowd thinks in images, and the image itself calls up a series of other images having no logical connection with the first. Scroll through any social media platform and watch how your mind jumps from image to image, emotion to emotion, outrage to outrage, with no logical thread connecting them. Meanwhile, the metrics surrounding each post whisper constantly, 'This is what everyone else thinks. Don't you want to belong?' But here's what's truly unsettling. Le Bon observed that educated, intelligent people weren't immune to crowd psychology. In fact, they were often more susceptible because they had more sophisticated ways of rationalizing their crowd behavior. Sound familiar? How many brilliant people do you know who become completely different personalities online? The digital age has created something Le Bon could never have imagined: permanent, instant crowds that never disperse. We carry these psychological crowds in our pockets, and they're always calling us to lose ourselves in their collective emotions. But this raises a deeper question. Why do we answer that call? Why do we willingly surrender our individual consciousness to become part of these digital mobs? To understand that, we need to explore the thoughts of a philosopher who witnessed something far more sinister than social media outrage. Hannah Arendt was a political theorist who fled Nazi Germany and spent her life trying to understand one of history's most disturbing questions. How do ordinary people become complicit in systems of oppression? Her answer was both simple and terrifying: thoughtlessness. Arendt coined the phrase, "the banality of evil," after observing Adolf Eichmann's trial. She expected to see a monster, but instead found a bureaucrat. Someone who participated in horrific acts, not out of malice, but out of an inability or unwillingness to think for himself. He wasn't evil in the dramatic sense. He was just thoughtless. This concept of thoughtlessness is crucial for understanding our digital predicament. Arendt argued that thinking is not a natural human activity. It requires effort, courage, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. Most of the time, we prefer to operate on autopilot, following established patterns and social cues rather than engaging in the difficult work of independent thought. Now, consider your typical interaction with social media. You open the app not because you consciously decided to, but because you felt a vague urge or boredom. You scroll through content that an algorithm has selected for you, based on patterns of engagement designed to capture your attention. You react, share, comment, and move on. At what point in this process did you actually think? The platforms are designed to minimize thinking. They present you with binary choices: like or ignore, share or scroll, react with a predetermined emoji. They encourage quick, emotional responses over slow, thoughtful consideration. They show you content that confirms what you already believe or provokes strong emotional reactions. They make thinking feel unnecessary, even counterproductive. Arendt observed that thoughtlessness creates a particular kind of complicity. People don't consciously choose to participate in harmful systems. They simply fail to question them. They go along to get along. They follow the path of least resistance. They become what she called bureaucratic agents of harm, people who cause damage through administrative participation rather than direct action. In our digital age, we've all become bureaucratic agents of harm of sorts. We participate in systems that harvest our data, manipulate our emotions, spread misinformation, and polarize society. Not because we want these outcomes, but because we don't think deeply about the consequences of our participation. Consider how social media platforms make money. They sell our attention to advertisers, which means their success depends on keeping us engaged, often through content that makes us angry, afraid, or outraged. We know this, yet we continue to provide our attention freely. We've become complicit in our own manipulation through thoughtlessness. Arendt also wrote about the human need for belonging and how this need can override our capacity for independent judgment. Online, this manifests as the desperate pursuit of likes, shares, and comments. External validation that tells us we belong to the group. We adjust our thoughts and expressions to fit what we believe the algorithm or our social network wants to hear. Think about how you craft your posts. Do you share your authentic thoughts, or do you consider how they'll be received? Do you ask yourself, what will get engagement? Do you avoid topics that might be controversial, even if they're important to you? This is self-censorship, driven by the need for digital belonging. The most insidious aspect of thoughtless participation is that it feels voluntary. No one forces you to scroll, to react, to share. You feel like you're choosing, but your choices are being shaped by systems designed to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. You're freely choosing what you've been conditioned to choose. Arendt warned that thoughtlessness creates a kind of moral vacuum where people can participate in harmful systems while maintaining their self-image as good people. They're not bad. They're just not thinking about what they're doing or why they're doing it. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. This thoughtless participation isn't just exploiting our natural tendencies. It's being carefully engineered by systems that know more about our behavior than we do. To understand how this works, we need to explore the insights of a philosopher who revealed how power operates through surveillance and control. Michel Foucault was a French philosopher who spent his career studying how power really works in modern society. His most famous insight came from analyzing a prison design called the Panopticon, a circular building where guards could observe all prisoners from a central tower, but prisoners couldn't tell if they were being watched. The genius of the Panopticon wasn't that it watched everyone all the time, it was that it could watch anyone at any time. The prisoners, never knowing when they were under observation, began to police their own behavior. They internalized the watcher, becoming both prisoner and guard simultaneously. Foucault realized that this principle extended far beyond prisons. Modern power doesn't need to force compliance. It shapes behavior through surveillance, data collection, and the subtle modification of choices. You don't feel oppressed because you're not being directly controlled. Instead, you're being guided, nudged, and shaped in ways that feel like your own decisions. Welcome to the digital Panopticon. Every click, scroll, pause, and interaction is recorded, analyzed, and fed into algorithms that know you better than you know yourself. These systems don't control you through force. They control you through prediction and modification of your future choices. Consider how recommendation algorithms work. They analyze your past behavior to predict what you'll want to see next. But prediction becomes creation. By showing you content based on who they think you are, they actively shape who you become. If the algorithm thinks you're interested in conspiracy theories, it will show you more conspiracy content, gradually shifting your worldview. If it thinks you're politically conservative or liberal, it will create an echo chamber that reinforces and radicalizes those views. The most disturbing aspect is that this happens beneath the threshold of consciousness. You feel like you're discovering content organically, but you're actually being fed a carefully curated stream designed to maximize engagement. Your sense of curiosity and discovery is being manufactured. Foucault wrote about disciplinary power, the way modern institutions shape behavior not through punishment, but through normalization. Social media platforms are the ultimate disciplinary institutions. They establish norms of behavior: what gets likes, what gets shares, what gets you followers, and then reward conformity to those norms. Think about how you've modified your online behavior over time. You've learned what works and what doesn't. You've internalized the platform's values and begun to self-censor, self-promote, and self-optimize according to its metrics. You've become your own social media manager, constantly working to maintain and improve your digital performance. This is what Foucault called technologies of the self, the ways we monitor, discipline, and modify our own behavior to fit institutional expectations. Social media platforms have created the most sophisticated technologies of the self in human history. Foucault observed that the most effective forms of power are invisible. You don't resist what you can't see. The digital Panopticon operates through what he called pastoral power. It claims to care for your well-being while subtly shaping your behavior for its own purposes. The platforms present themselves as neutral tools that simply connect people and facilitate communication. In reality, they're behavioral modification engines that monetize human attention and emotion. They're not social networks. They're social control networks. The genius of this system is that resistance feels impossible. How do you fight an algorithm? How do you opt out of a system that claims to give you what you want? How do you maintain privacy in a world where privacy is seen as suspicious? Even more troubling, the system adapts to resistance. If you try to game the algorithm, it learns from your gaming. If you try to avoid certain content, your avoidance becomes data that shapes future recommendations. If you delete your account, your absence becomes a data point that helps the system understand other users. We're trapped in a web of our own making, paying for the privilege of being monitored and manipulated. We've built our own prison and furnished it with entertainment. So here we are, caught in digital crowds that override our individual reasoning, participating thoughtlessly in systems that exploit our need for belonging, trapped in an invisible prison that disguises surveillance as service. This sounds hopeless, doesn't it? But what if there was another way? What if ancient wisdom could show us how to navigate this digital maze with awareness, authenticity, and freedom? Let's explore how a philosopher who bridged Eastern and Western thought might offer us a path toward liberation. Enter Alan Watts, the British philosopher who spent his life translating Eastern wisdom for Western minds. Writing in the 1960s, decades before the internet, Watts explored questions that are more relevant now than ever. What is authentic being? How do we escape the prison of the ego? How do we live with awareness in a world of illusions? Watts would have looked at our digital predicament and immediately recognized it as a symptom of what Buddhism calls dukkha, the suffering that comes from attachment, craving, and the illusion of the separate self. Every aspect of our online behavior stems from the ego's desperate attempt to maintain and enhance itself through external validation. Think about your relationship with your online persona. You've created a digital version of yourself, carefully curated photos, witty comments, strategic shares. You monitor its performance obsessively. How many likes? How many followers? How many shares? You feel genuine pain when it's ignored, and genuine pleasure when it's validated. You've become attached to a fictional character that you've created. Watts would say this attachment is the root of our digital suffering. The online self isn't real. It's a collection of images, words, and reactions that exist only in the digital realm. Yet we invest enormous emotional energy in maintaining and improving this phantom. We suffer when it's criticized, celebrate when it's praised, and constantly worry about its reputation. But here's Watts's crucial insight. The solution isn't to create a better online persona. It's to see through the illusion of the persona entirely. What if you could engage with digital platforms without being attached to the outcomes? What if you could participate without losing yourself in the participation? Watts often spoke about the wisdom of insecurity, the idea that true security comes from accepting uncertainty and impermanence rather than trying to control outcomes. Applied to our digital lives, this means posting without obsessing over likes, sharing without needing validation, engaging without requiring agreement. This doesn't mean becoming passive or disengaged. It means acting from a place of authentic interest rather than ego-driven need. When you comment on something, are you genuinely contributing to a conversation, or are you performing for an audience? When you share content, are you sharing something meaningful, or are you feeding the engagement machine? Watts introduced Western audiences to the Zen concept of beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness, free from the burden of accumulated opinions and expectations. Imagine scrolling through social media with beginner's mind. Instead of immediately categorizing content as agree or disagree, you might simply observe, here's a perspective I haven't considered. Instead of reacting emotionally to provocative content, you might pause and wonder, what's really happening here? This practice of conscious observation breaks the automatic patterns that keep us trapped in digital crowds. Remember Le Bon's insight about contagion. Emotions spread through crowds because people react unconsciously. But if you're observing your reactions rather than being controlled by them, you become immune to emotional contagion. Watts also explored the Buddhist teaching of non-attachment, the ability to engage fully with life while remaining internally free. In digital terms, this means using platforms without being used by them. You can post content without being attached to its reception. You can read opposing viewpoints without feeling threatened. You can participate in conversations without needing to win. The key insight is that your online behavior is a choice, not a compulsion. Every scroll, every click, every reaction is an opportunity to act consciously rather than automatically. Watts would encourage us to treat our digital interactions as a form of meditation, a practice of awareness in the midst of distraction. Consider how this changes your relationship with algorithmic manipulation. When you understand that the system is designed to trigger automatic responses, you can choose to respond differently. The algorithm shows you outrage content to provoke engagement, but you can observe the outrage without being consumed by it. The platform creates artificial urgency to keep you scrolling, but you can recognize the artificiality and choose your own pace. Watts often spoke about the game, the social conventions and roles that we play without realizing we're playing them. Social media is the ultimate game, with its points, likes, levels, follower counts, and achievements, viral posts. The problem isn't playing the game, it's forgetting that it's a game. When you remember that it's all a game, you can play with lightness and joy rather than desperation and attachment. You can experiment with different approaches, laugh at failures, and celebrate successes without losing perspective. You can even choose not to play certain games that don't serve your authentic interests. This brings us to Watts's most profound teaching, the interconnectedness of all things. The separate self that's trying to build and maintain an online persona is itself an illusion. You're not separate from others. You're part of the same flowing process of existence. When you truly understand this, the desperate need for external validation dissolves. You don't need likes to know you exist. You don't need followers to know you matter. You don't need viral posts to know you have something valuable to contribute. Your worth isn't determined by metrics. It's inherent in your being. From this perspective, authentic online engagement becomes possible. You share not to get something, but to give something. You comment not to be seen, but to genuinely connect. You participate not to feed your ego, but to contribute to the larger conversation of human experience. So here we are, having journeyed through 4 perspectives on our digital predicament. Let's weave them together into a practical understanding of how to maintain authentic awareness in our hyper-connected world. Le Bon showed us how digital crowds override individual reasoning through anonymity, contagion, and suggestibility. The antidote is conscious participation, remaining aware of when you're being swept up in collective emotions and choosing your responses rather than reacting automatically. Arendt revealed how thoughtless participation makes us complicit in systems that exploit us. The antidote is the courage to think, to pause, question, and consider the consequences of your digital actions rather than operating on autopilot. Foucault exposed how surveillance capitalism shapes our behavior through invisible monitoring and behavioral modification. The antidote is awareness of the system, understanding how algorithms work, recognizing manipulation when it happens, and making conscious choices about your level of participation. Watts offered the deepest solution: liberation from the ego's need for external validation through authentic being and non-attachment. When you're no longer desperately seeking likes, shares, and follows, you become free to engage authentically with whatever genuinely interests you. Together, these insights point toward a new way of being online, what we might call conscious digital citizenship. This means scrolling with awareness instead of autopilot, posting from authenticity instead of ego, and engaging from genuine interest instead of compulsive need. The next time you feel that familiar pull to check your phone, pause and ask yourself, am I acting from awareness or automation? When you feel triggered by something you see online, remember that your emotional reaction is data being harvested for profit. When you craft a post, consider whether you're sharing something meaningful or just feeding the engagement machine. The digital revolution isn't going to reverse itself. These platforms and their psychological manipulation techniques will only become more sophisticated. But consciousness is always more powerful than conditioning. When you understand the game, you can choose how to play it, or whether to play it at all. Your attention is your most valuable resource. Your awareness is your greatest power. Your authentic being is your deepest gift to the world. Don't let them be harvested by systems that care nothing for your well-being. The ancient question, "Who am I?" has never been more relevant. In a world of digital personas and algorithmic manipulation, knowing yourself, your genuine interests, values, and purposes, becomes an act of rebellion. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you unlock your phone, take a breath and remember that you have a choice. You can scroll unconsciously into the digital crowd, or you can navigate these waters with the awareness of a sage. The technology is the same, but the consciousness you bring to it makes all the difference. What kind of digital citizen will you choose to be?